Well, hello and happy Valentine's Day, a little early, to everyone. This is the tarot for February 2025. And as always, we have some interesting card insights to share this month. So I was very curious about what the cards had to say about Donald Trump's first 6 months as president. And I was kind of electrified by the idea of an end to the IRS and income taxes, because I've always assumed that they paid for our government. Maybe that's wrong. I'm not sure. Anyway, I also that same kind of regarding an end to the European Union. There's all kinds of stuff happening over there. And so those became my questions, my main questions. But lastly, I wondered, of course, what the animal world would ask us to be mindful of over the next month. So let's begin. So the questions are, number one, what do the cards have to say about the results of Donald Trump's executive orders over his first 6 months in office? Question number two, what will happen to the U.S. government if the IRS and income taxes are ended? Number three, what will be the outcome in Europe if the European Union comes apart? And number four, what advice does the animal kingdom have for us in February? And the cards drawn in answer to question number one was the Nine of Wands. Wow. The Nine of Wands. Question number two, we got the Hierophant, number 5 in the Major Arcana, and the Knight of Swords came out as well. So for question number 3, regarding the European Union, we have the High Priestess. That was a surprise. And for question number 4, the animal medicine card is the Great Blue Heron, number 5 in the animal medicine deck. So let's start with question number 1. What do the cards have to say about the results of Donald Trump's executive orders over his first 6 months in office? And as I said, the card drawn here was the Nine of Wands. This is the card of the exhausted warrior who's now a seasoned fighter. When we look at the card, we see a figure holding a wand, kind of leaning on it actually, looking warily off to the right as if on guard. He has a bandaged head and wears a reddish-brown tunic over a shirt with purple sleeves. There's a black belt or sash around his waist, and he wears green boots and leggings. Behind him stand 8 wands, all of different heights. And beyond the wands is a landscape of lush green mountains with many peaks. The ground he stands on is gray, and the sky above is a bright blue. This is the card of one who is coping with many different issues coming from every direction. It represents being pushed into actions and areas of life that were previously ignored, unwanted, or unknown. It's the card of one who has faced many battles, has kept the wolf away from the door, has survived, but is weary and tired. The figure looks off to his right with a very wary, alert, almost suspicious look on his face. And it is clear that he remains on guard because the fight is not over. If he were looking to the left, we would know he's facing issues coming from the spiritual, emotional side of life. However, he's looking to the right. And that symbolizes facing physical, practical matters of great importance that affect everyday living. Wands are the suit of taking action. Often, that action is sudden, It's unplanned or intuitive action, and wands represent the element of fire, which symbolizes transformation to another state of being. The figure on the card is holding one wand, which symbolizes having to take action, as well as taking responsibility for our own transformation. He's holding the wand with both hands, indicating that people have had to use both hands to grasp the situations they are coping with. Since our question is about the results of Trump's executive orders, this tells us that for the first 6 months of his administration, people will struggle to cope with the changes. The use of both hands also symbolizes hanging on for dear life, to something close to the heart, usually. Sometimes maybe the homeland or a way of life. Since both hands are grasping the wand, it carries the message that our hands are full, meaning we can't handle anything more right now. And also that it would be best to deal with one thing at a time. The bandage around his head tells us that he has been wounded, has suffered injury and pain, and is not yet healed. And that's true. We have been wounded. We have suffered injury and pain, and we are not yet healed. Bandages also symbolize a condition of poor thinking and beliefs in false ideas, illusions that are still being corrected and let go of. So bandages indicate kind of a hanging on there as well. They indicate situations that are less than ideal that must be dealt with one way or another. The 8 wands standing behind him carry many messages. The fact that they are standing there on their own indicates actions and changes that are not only long-standing, but each of those wands represents an issue that has to have a unique freestanding resolution. The wands that you see behind him are all of varying heights, which tells us that each represents a situation that carries its own challenge, and each has its own level of development and possibility. The warning is we cannot lump them all into one pile and expect anything to be resolved. They have to be dealt with one thing at a time. The fact that some of the wands are directly behind a figure advises that we need to be looking around in every direction, look behind, and make sure that we are dealing with everything and not overlooking anything. In fact, the question that comes with this card is, do you know what's happening behind your back? Do you realize what is going on? These are disturbing questions intended to push us into deeper thinking that moves away from a Pollyanna approach to a situation. In the distant background, the lush green mountains symbolize a multitude of problems across the landscape of life, with each coming to a peak that, once dealt with, brings healing. The color green is both the color of healing as well as the sign that a lack of experience has and possibly still is a complicating factor. The reddish-brown tunic symbolizes practical matters of business and money, whereas the purple shirt sleeves point to a high level of spirit and consciousness. That's a good thing. I think we can deal with things better if we maintain that high spirit and high-level consciousness. That black sash around the figure's waist urges us to waste no time coming up with creative solutions to problems and to let go of old ideas. The green leggings and boots hint that the figure is in the process of growing and maturing, becoming less gullible, less foolish, less naive. And naivete is a cultural weak point for Americans. The boots represent the heavy work that is needed to complete the maturing process. And the gray ground he stands on calls for a seriously neutral approach that is free from bias, prejudice, illusions, and apathy. The bright blue sky says that the outlook is good, but clarity will be needed to reach a good outcome. The Nine of Wands is a card that acknowledges a fearful situation, and it has been. And it urges awareness of a 360-degree nature. It tells us that we have extraordinary strength, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and that this strength comes from deep within consciousness. It does warn that we will have to go beyond our usual limits, and it suggests that we take time to develop a vision and then the courage and strength to pursue that vision. It is a card of intensity, climax, and integration. And it hints that we are drawing near to completion of a cycle that has been very stressful and unstable. The number 9 itself is a number of completion, especially completion of spiritual achievements after having been pushed beyond one's limits. The 9 forces people to deal with unchecked ambition. Theirs and that unchecked ambition coming from others. But it encourages people by saying, you love a challenge. Now go deal with it. Since our question is about the results of all those executive orders signed by Trump, this card tells us that we cannot yet let down our guard, even though we are weary and tired. However, it offers comfort in saying that completion is near. Okay, so keywords for the Nine of Wands are fullness, intensity, instability, change, great strength, separation, a wounded warrior, the need for vigilance, perseverance, resilience, higher learning, ambition, achievement, and abruptness. So that's it for the Nine of Wands. Question number 2. What will happen to the U.S. government if the IRS and income taxes are ended? And I ask this question because it seemed to me that if income taxes went away or were seriously reduced, the federal government might collapse or at least be seriously reduced. And maybe that's what they're trying to do. So anyway, I thought I would ask the cards for some insight. And the cards drawn were the Hierophant, number 5 in the major arcana, and the Knight of Swords flipped out there. So this is a very interesting pair of cards to draw in response to this question. This is the card of the turning point. That's the Hierophant. And although the Hierophant looks like it represents the Pope, its true meaning is a return of power to the people. It represents the restoration of the right to decide things for ourselves according to what we think, what we want, or what we can accomplish. The Knight of Swords then backs this up with a focused, intentional, determined mind. So these two are kind of a wow combination when it comes to any question of taxes or the IRS. So when we look at the Hierophant card, we see a figure sitting on a throne wearing a bright red robe and a triple crown. The Hierophant symbolizes the power once belonging to kings and priests is now in the hands of the people who are passionate, passion being symbolized by that red robe, about the issue of taxes and the IRS. So this is an issue that people are really passionate about. The Triple Crown symbolizes the power of the bridge builder. The bridge builder is one who builds a heaven on earth by teaching the principles of higher consciousness, joy, justice, truth, love, and all those other ethics that make life better and more rewarding for everyone, and allow everyone to develop according to their interests instead of the need to make money in order to survive. Wow. Okay. The Hierophant wears a blue garment with white sleeves under the red robe and white shoes with a little cross on each. The undergarment, and in fact, all undergarments, symbolize your foundations. And this is a blue, the color blue indicates a possibility of both clarity and depression, depending on what is built on that firm foundation. The white sleeves and shoes point to a starting point, like starting with a blank sheet of paper, as well as emptiness or new intellectual territory in which we have not had much experience. So, and we have not. Anybody alive today has been living with taxes for a very long time. The crosses on the shoes point to a challenge that can only be met with a clear understanding of what we want or what we are willing to put up with, as well as high-level consciousness and belief in our own power. Wow. The Hierophant's right hand is raised in the sign of approval or permission. This is sometimes called the sign of blessing, but really what it means is, yeah, go ahead. Okay, we approve. And the other hand holds a staff with 3 crosses on it. Now, 2 crosses on that staff would be the staff of a bishop, but a bishop is still under the leadership and control of someone else. The 3 crosses are the sign of the highest leadership and the freedom and power to decide what will be. Since our question is about the results of an end to the IRS and income taxes, that hand sign of approval and the 3 cross staff tell us that we have to decide for ourselves how much government we want, what to keep, and what to let go of. The gray throne, he's sitting on a gray throne, calls for neutrality and enough detachment to implement decisions. And that throne sits on an orange-colored platform. So it represents the vitality and energy of the business world. So whatever decisions are made will greatly affect not only the government, but the world of business, which in turn affects the personal lives of all citizens. On the floor of that platform that the throne is sitting on, there are 4 black and white checkered strips crossing the platform, and they warn of the need for practicality and common sense. They say, look, it's going to be black and white. It's going to be easy to see what is needed and what is excess or what is not good or. So there are a pair of keys on the front of the platform, and those keys symbolize the knowledge and wisdom needed to make good choices. And then down in front, right at the very bottom of the card, there are 2 monks with tonsured hair in front of the Hierophant. And they represent a willingness to be guided by higher consciousness and intuition. Hair hair represents personal thoughts, personal ideas, personal preferences. And removing the hair on the back of the head symbolizes removing some of your own personal thinking in order to make room for inspiration and guidance from God or source or whatever you call that great intelligent power that has shaped us all. So the monk on the left wears a robe with roses on it, symbolizing love. And the monk on the right wears a robe with lilies on it, symbolizing the power to sustain ourselves wisely and well. The throne is situated between two ornate columns, representing community and its institutions. This tells us that every area of community and life would be impacted by such a decision around taxes and the IRS, while the sky in the background is gray, indicating that there would likely be some confusion, some misunderstanding, and a bit of chaos, all of which call for taking a conscious position of neutral detachment until things settle down into new routines and responsibilities. So, as mentioned above, the Knight of Swords backs all of this up by being willing to fight for what we want using passion and intentionality. In fact, this is the card of passion and intentionality. So the Knight calls for deeply aligned focus, will, and intention, all moving in the same direction. If we want to reach that goal, we have to do that alignment. The Knight of Swords represents swift action, fast-moving change, strong winds. Winds are thinking and consciousness. And a need to deeply understand the impact of such a move, since it is taxes that create and repair roads, maintain the armies and police that protect citizens from gangs, cartels, and other countries, and support large projects like getting to the moon or elsewhere in the solar system. What do we want to give up? What do we want to support? The number 5 on the Hierophant card is the number of the turning point, and it represents having reached a point of no return. Keywords for the Hierophant are proclaim your truth, sustainability, bridge builder, captivity, what you decide is what will be, power, mercy, decision-making, finding answers, divine spark, competence, and approval. Wow. So that's quite a bunch of thinking for the IRS and taxes, income taxes. So question number 3, what will be the outcome in Europe if the European Union comes apart? And this question came up repeatedly as I prepared to start the tarot, and I included it because over the past 40 years, I have observed that what happens in Europe is what happens in the US. There's usually a time gap there, several years, sometimes as much as 8 or 10 years. But if it happens in Europe, it follows. The same thing happens here in the US. To my great surprise, the card drawn here was the High Priestess, number 2 in the Major Arcana. The High Priestess is considered by many to be the most powerful card in the tarot deck. It is a card whose message is establish your own opinion and then live by it. So that's quite a message. There are 27 countries in the European Union, and regardless of what the historical record says about why the EU was created, my own view, my personal view, has always been that it was an attempt to copy the US by creating a power block that could function as a threat, maybe an ally, or balance to U.S. power. Unfortunately, the EU claimed for itself all of the rights and financial benefits of the various countries, but then left them with all the debts. It didn't want to take on any people's debts, any country's debts. The high priestess turns that entire effort on its head by returning all of the rights, values, resources, and cultural preferences to each country. Wow. So my concern that Europe would disintegrate may not be something to worry about. When we look at this card, we see an elegantly dressed woman wearing flowing blue robes with a cross on her breast. She holds a scroll and wears a crown made of 3 stages of the moon: a waxing moon, a full moon, and a waning moon, which symbolizes the startup of the EU, a period of fullness and effectiveness, and now the decline of the EU. The flowing blue fabric represents a great deal of emotion flowing through the people of the various countries as a result of their experiences in that EU organization. The scroll on her lap is an ancient form for a book. We used to have scrolls, not books. Now we have books, not scrolls. So that scroll represents the book of life, the history of choices and experiences of a people. And this scroll held by the high priestess symbolizes that responsibility for writing the script of their own lives is now in the hands of the people. The cross on the breast of the high priestess symbolizes death and resurrection. And since our question is, what would be the result of the breakup of the EU? This would say that the various countries and cultures that underwent a sort of death or move into the underworld by joining the EU would experience a resurrection and a rebirth if that EU broke up. On either side of the throne, there's a column. One is black and with a B on it, and the other is gray with a J on it. And the columns themselves represent pillars upholding a structure of some kind. And in this case, the structures of the original countries are represented. The black column with B on it represents strength and the need to be creative. That gray column with the J on it represents courage and the need to establish new structures for the future. That's kind of exciting. The back of the high priestess's throne is covered with palm trees and pomegranates. And these two symbols represent victory, prosperity, and sexuality. So the victory and prosperity would be for the individual countries. And sexuality represents the drive to create something new, to give birth to something all new, based on the passions and the visions of those individual countries involved. So behind the columns and the throne, and you can barely see it, but if you look carefully, you can see that the sky and the sea flow together, which says that a whole new way of existence is possible, one that expresses itself in ways that bring populations to a more heaven-like or pleasing state. That sounds good to me. So this merging of heaven and emotions is characterized by a need for clarity in the face of possible naivete on the part of the young ones who've never lived outside of the structure of the EU. At the foot of the high priestess, there's a very large crescent moon. And that crescent moon symbolizes the astrological sign of Taurus and the ancient era of the matriarchs. This symbolizes change, oppression by the ruling class, that's Taurus actually, and a patriarchal society that is out of balance without the matriarchy to accompany it. Since the high priestess is a symbol of growth and the start of a decade-long cycle of learning to be self-sufficient, she marks the start of a period of lessons involving independence. So that there's a couple things happening there, coming together of patriarchy and matriarchy to make a balanced civilization, and a lot of learning as countries relearn how to be independent, how to be resourceful, how to develop a new identity. And this card has little or no tolerance for being limited, restricted, or restrained. Like, nope, not having that. Because our question has to do with the results of the breakup of the EU, this card hints at a process that, once begun, would be nearly impossible to stop, due to the fact that the High Priestess represents excellent negotiators, consultants, and people who can analyze the situation in highly gifted ways. And therefore, they come to good decisions, and they're able to move things forward. So the number 2, this is the second card in the major arcana, symbolizes the feminine side of taking care of business, which is much more likely to come up with common sense things that work well for the greater majority. Women are pretty good at common sense. So key words for the High Priestess are revelation of secrets, tenacity, wisdom, silence, oppression by rulers, resourcefulness, a need for balance, independence, receptivity, waiting to be trusted, journey homeward, long barren distance to the goal, return to individuation, and use of intuition. So that is the end of question number 3. And lastly, we have, what advice does the animal kingdom have for us in February? And the card drawn this month was the great blue heron, a wonderful symbol of aggressive self-reliance and self-determination. So that theme of self-reliance, self-determination, deciding what you want, going after it, making it happen, that seems to be a theme running through February. So the heron belongs to a group of birds known as waders, W-A-D-E-R-S. And this symbolizes being willing to wade into all kinds of situations and then just stand there and watch, allowing yourself to become keenly aware of what's going on under the surface, and then only taking action when there's a payoff. Boom. You know, for the heron, it's a fish. So the great blue heron is also a symbol of the need for self-reflection without demanding perfection or instant gratification. We have this habit of wanting things instantly. No. So this card has little patience with self-pity and even less patience with self-importance. Okay, it asks, well, who do you think you are? And then after a little bit of time, it asks, now, who are you really? It warns against being too harsh with the self and says striving for perfection leaves no room for just being human. It also advises against projecting that harshness onto others. The legs of the heron are long and very thin, symbolizing that we do not need big, stout, sturdy legs to stand on. We just need exquisite balance and deliberate, well-placed steps that allow us to evolve and grow in the direction we choose. The message of those thin legs? is that all that is really necessary is to learn to stand on your own. The great blue heron has been called the king of the marshlands, reminding us that we can handle marshy territory that doesn't feel very stable. The heron will stand silently in the water, staring below the surface for very long periods of time. And since water is the universal symbol of emotion, this tells us that we can handle our emotions even when they run deep. All we have to do is get below the surface. We just need to keep still and move only when there's a reward for doing so. So herons represent those who are willing to explore and learn from many other dimensions of life. They also symbolize a willingness to explore various activities and paths, which usually looks like a lot of dabbling, but the reward is a continuous discovery and learning process. This leads to becoming a jack of all trades, something that is needed if you want to be self-reliant. So the message of the great blue heron is one that runs counter to conformity, and it says, follow your own path. You do not need as much of the structure, stability, and security that you have become accustomed to. It promises that if one way doesn't work, another will. But you have to be willing to experiment and explore. As you might expect, heron medicine says you do not need to keep up with the Joneses or follow tradition in the family, the community, the nation, etc. In fact, herons are somewhat solitary. They like their privacy, and they only get together with others during the breeding season, something that encourages us to stand on our own, stay connected, but don't waste all of your time and energy socializing. There are many tasks that must be taken care of in the course of the day. However, in the same way that the heron will stand quietly watching and then suddenly snatch a fish who happens to come by, we are advised to stay alert and aware of opportunities that come our way and quickly snatch up those opportunities to feed and care for the self. This requires a measure of trust. Trust that the universe will send things our way, which it will, if you're paying attention. The great blue heron is able to fly at night and might even prefer flying at night, symbolizing an ability to navigate the darkness and stay on track regardless of available light. It warns against becoming too critical and to recognize that there are layers of truth that are often impossible to grasp in a single moment. Therefore, it tells us to return to study and reflect on the deeper layers until the whole truth has been revealed. Key words for the great blue heron are self-reliance, reflection, independence, self-discovery, joy, judgmental, supreme balance, opening other dimensions, and recognizing advantage. So that's it for this tarot. So let's do a quick summary of what we've said. So question number 1 was, what do the cards have to say about the results of Donald Trump's executive orders over his first 6 months in office? And the tarot card drawn here was the 9 of Wands, the card of the exhausted, injured warrior who's coping with issues, difficulties, and attacks coming from every direction while hanging on to something close to the heart. The message of this card is a question that asks, do you know what's happening behind your back? Do you realize what is going on? And this has been a theme that's come up again and again in many of the tarot readings over the past year. It keeps pushing us to stop being naive and to adopt a more sophisticated view of our situation. The Nine of Wands signals that we are coming to the end of a cycle, but we have to maintain a watchful position because the battle is not over yet. Question number 2 was, what will happen to the U.S. government if the IRS and income taxes are ended? And the cards drawn in answer to this question were 2. They were the Hierophant, number 5 in the Major Arcana, and the Knight of Swords. These 2 cards pack a punch in terms of their wow factor. The Hierophant represents a turning point in which power returns to the people, who are then free to decide for themselves how much government they want and what sort of taxes they are willing to pay. Wow. The Knight of Swords is the perfect companion to the Hierophant in that the Knight represents clear intention and a willingness to fight passionately for the goals that we set. The need to be practical is an important caveat with these 2 cards. And although they encourage the use of intuition and common sense, they warn that a vision, an attitude of love, some careful neutrality, and practical plans are needed to make it through what would become a time of fast-moving change, confusion, and some chaos. Heads up there. Question number 3, what would be the outcome in Europe if the European Union comes apart? And I asked this question for a couple of reasons, partly because what happens in Europe is what will happen in the US, and partly because I was concerned that Europe would dissolve into a new Libya if the European Union came apart. However, the card drawn, the High Priestess, surprised me, because this is a wonderful, powerful card of death and resurrection, of building new and beautifully balanced institutions and governance structures that work better for all because they spring from the people. The message of this card is establish your opinion and live by it. It symbolizes being freed from oppression by a ruling class. And even though this would be the start of like a decades-long process of deep lessons involving freedom and independence that creates a whole new identity for the countries involved, the result would bring heaven and earth a little closer together and make a better life for all, and one in which humans can continue to grow in wisdom, power, and grace. I love that. It's like, oh, wow. I hope that's coming to the US as well. And the last one, question number 4, what advice does the animal kingdom have for us in February? And the card drawn here was the Great Blue Heron, number 45 in the Animal Medicine deck, a wonderful symbol of aggressive self-reliance and self-determination. The heron is a wader and is willing to wade into the waters of emotion and then stand there to reflect and watch what's going on under the surface, but take no action until the exact moment when opportunity presents itself. Only then does it act, suddenly, and with stunning speed and effectiveness, to spear its prey. The question brought by the Great Blue Heron is, who do you think you are? And then a little later, now, who are you really? In light of the changes happening at a very fast pace, we may wake up one day and realize we have changed. We are not who we once were. Herons encourage a slow, careful walk on mushy, unstable ground. And they urge us, forget the Joneses, as we try many paths and collect as much experience and know-how as possible because we are likely to need it in order to be self-reliant, self-sufficient, sustainable people. So that's it for this month. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Put on your discernment hat as we go through February and pay attention to the details. And like I said before, happy Valentine's Day a little bit early. Enjoy the month. See you next month.